Everything in heaven is in chaos. Unfortunately, so is everything in hell. The political position of the Marxist left in the so-called West is catastrophic. Despite these forces holding organisational form as the clearest expression of their theoretical pretensions, the same situation prevails throughout their ranks. A largely disorganised milieu constituted of small quote-unquote parties, factions within nominally liberal or social democratic bourgeois parties, and the occasional direct action network. Overwhelmingly populated by students, downwardly mobile graduates, and alienated social subjects, these formations each preach their own revolutionary program. All they require is the masses to acquiesce, which of course they don't. What we are describing is what Marx called a system of socialist sects. Though theory is no answer to the problems it presents, it is better to see than to stumble on blindly. Over the next few minutes, we will investigate Marx's approach to class organisation and the sect system, consider later contributions to this debate, and an example of political organisation which transcended the trap. Then root these concepts in our present context. We hope this can inform a sincere discussion, contributing to the renewal of a strategic Marxism. A reading list and a study guide for groups is attached in the video description. Welcome to Approaching Marxism. To begin to make sense of Marx's view of the sect, we first need to understand his view of what proletarian organisation properly consists of. This is succinctly outlined in an 1871 letter to the First International's New York representative, Friedrich Bult, in which Marx compares sect politics to workers' organisation. Here, he argues that the isolated economic movements of the workers' struggle must give rise to a general political struggle, giving the example of individual strikes in Britain to limit the working day, forming into a national movement for legislation to this effect. The key is the self-activity of the working class. This is consistent with Marx's view of communism as a strategic practice, outlined in Isabel Garrow's book Communism and Strategy, and our previous episode in this series. More important than theoretical consistency, Marx's position reflects the real development of the International itself. Founded in 1864, the organisation's initial gains came from attempts at internationally coordinated economic struggle. 1867 was the banner year. Strikes by bronze workers in Paris, iron workers in Marchienne, and building workers in Geneva all won out through their participation in the International, which coordinated workers in other countries to raise funds and refuse work which would have broken their comrades' struggles. From these victories, the organisation was able to consolidate around 150,000 members under the principle that the emancipation of the working classes must be conquered by the working classes themselves by 1871. It was also within this organisational context that Marx developed his concept of the sect. Throughout its existence, the International's commitment to self-emancipation was beset by repeated political attacks. Marx's conflicts with the followers of Lassalle, Proudhon and Bakunin are among the most famous examples. Proudhon and his disciples offered the politics most indicative of a sect ideology, rejecting even the strike as deepening class antagonism between capitalist and worker, which their doctrine of mutualism sought to reconcile. The International Alliance of Social Democracy, founded by Bakunin and his followers, illustrates the organisational logic of a sect. Initially setting itself up as a rival to the First International, Bakunin's faction revealed the narrow social basis behind its claim after their application to join the organisation was rejected. All but their Geneva branch of 108 members were fictitious and vanished overnight. Marx draws his definition of the sect from what united these disparate factions: their relationship to the workers' movement. The sect stands apart from workers' movements, formed around a special set of ideas or a programme which it seeks to insert into them. This is why Marx views all sects as essentially reactionary in the context of a real movement. Their ideas are not of it. Their actions try to substitute it. The basis for such formations lies in an ebb in the workers' movement, revolutionaries clustering around their own ideas when the pulse of a real movement lies dormant. This leads Marx to conclude that the development of the system of socialist sects and that of the real workers' movement always stand in inverse ratio to each other, in his letter to Bult. Crucially, this is not a prescription based upon any particular dogma, with Marx and Engels both rejecting the first quote-unquote Marxist party in Britain, the Social Democratic Federation, or SDF, as a sect. Ideas do not strictly matter. The real relations of struggle do.
And another new thing is that the dynamic militant action and even the leadership for the opposition to the present war comes from the campuses, from some professors, and primarily from students. And that, as far as I know, is something quite new in this country.
Despite its prevalence as a political obstacle, the sect has received scant theoretical attention since Marx. Later theorists have dealt with related problems, famous examples including Lenin and Luxemburg's theories of party and opportunism, but rarely treated the sect as an organisational form itself. The US Trotskyist Hal Draper, among the founders of the International Socialists, is the rare exception. His research on the sect, which goes so far as to trace every use of the word in Marx's work, is presented succinctly in two articles, Anatomy of the Microsect and Towards a New Beginning, and discussed in his 5-volume reconstruction of Marx's political theory, Karl Marx's Theory of Revolution. In all of these works, Draper reconstructs Marx's conceptual framework, arguing that a sect begins with a full programme which it treats as its organisational horizon. Rather than developing through struggle, the sect sees workers as ground to sow the seeds of its doctrine. Whilst Draper's reconstitution of Marx's conceptual framework is useful, what is more interesting is what he adds. The emphasis he lays on organisational reproduction is crucial. Draper argues that the sect views the path to revolutionary transformation as a process of organisational accretion. That is, the more members can be won to the cause, the larger the organisation gets, the closer communist society is. Strategy is reduced to maintaining and building the organisation.
The academic world never led anything in this country before of any social consequence to my knowledge. We have not had, as the other advanced countries had in Europe, the radical and socialistic student movement as we now see developing in this country.
Less useful are Draper's conclusions on the class composition of sects and his solution to the problems they pose. On class, he argues that a sect is always composed of mixed class strata, laying emphasis on students and intellectuals. Whilst this responds to a real problem in the social composition of the Western left, it is blinkered. For example, the early SDF drew the majority of its members from working men's clubs, and still drew up its own special programs by which to measure the movement. A workers' sect is possible. Equally problematic are Draper's resolutions to the problems of the sect. His argument for a Marxist centre, a publication to retain and reproduce a political tendency, contains a view that the problem of the sect is one of organisational form, not the concrete relationship to the struggle he treats elsewhere as definitional. This problem is also present in the theory of revolution from below, advanced in his multi-volume work on Marx, which transforms a relational concept of struggle into a trans-historical principle. Though his scholarship is vital, its aim is in correcting the ideas of so-called Stalinist bureaucracies. In a word, doctrine. All of these problems restrict Draper's utility, a sect logic mobilised to combat a sect system. This leaves us with a definition of the sect as an emergent property of political organisation and practice, a definition which must demonstrate its utility. The experience of the Communist Party of Great Britain, or CPGB, provides a clear example. Through its early activity, a system of sects was temporarily transformed into a revolutionary workers' party. The CPGB was the result of protracted unity negotiations, formed in 1920 with its first full conference in January 1921. The forces involved in these negotiations were overwhelmingly sects. For example, the largest organisations involved, the British Socialist Party and the Socialist Labour Party, were both descendants of the SDF. Despite positive campaigning against a British invasion of the young Soviet Republic and promising union work, both remained organised around and limited by their political programmes. unity alone did not move British Marxism beyond the sect. By the end of its first year, the CPGB was still largely an affiliation of propagandists, programmatic agreement serving as the basis for membership, and many paper members in consequence. Real engagement in the workers' movement remained marginal. As Draper observes, a unity of sects does not change the relation of organisation to the class, but produces a bigger sect. However, unification did group together elements engaged with the workers' movement among this system. Their work provided the social basis for the party's transformation. Post-war growth in union membership and action met with the reassertion of crisis conditions and the start of a protracted assault on wages in 1920. Miners were the first targeted, responding to wage cuts by calling strike action for September and requesting assistance from the so-called Triple Alliance with the National Union for Railwaymen and the National Transport Workers Federation. The reformist leaders of these unions refused, instead brokering a compromise and delaying strike action until the March of 1921. In the interim, CPGB members in the union movement founded the British Bureau of the Red International of Labour Unions, RILU, as a rallying centre to challenge the reformist bureaucracy, arguing government strategy was to isolate workers industry by industry, requiring unity across sectors. With no support from the so-called Triple Alliance, the miners' struggle provided illustration. The army brutally suppressed the eventual strike, and the industry was decontrolled, sending wages into freefall. Sector by sector, this pattern played out over 1921. An even greater intensity of struggle was forming among unemployed workers. With unemployment mounting through 1920, unemployed workers began to form organisations for the collection of arms from the summer on. Unemployed CPGB members saw the need for a more combative approach. They were able to intervene, a young CPGB member, Wal Hallington, leading the organisation of an all-London conference for the unemployed in October. This formalised the London District Council of the Unemployed, which grew to organise around 30 unemployed committees in just weeks. These councils organised militant demonstrations against the means testing of relief funds and mandatory labour under the slogan of work or full maintenance, a significant development of unemployed workers' politics. Through pitched battles with the police, they were able to secure a small rise in relief rates by November. With unemployment continuing to skyrocket, the organisation called a national conference in April 1921, forming with other organisations across the country into the National Unemployed Workers Committee movement, or NUWCM. CPGB members taking leadership positions. At its second conference in November, the new organisation emphasised the importance of solidarity with the trade union movement. The CPGB members in these class organisations were not among the party's leadership. Their work received some support, but was not treated as the real substance of the young party. As workers' struggles continued to develop, the CPGB's membership began to fall, the growth of Marxism's real subject leading to a decline of the sect. However, the party did not surrender to reactionary obsolescence. Opposed by leadership, members organised to meet the needs of the movement. At the Fourth Party Congress in March 1922, this tendency won out, establishing a commission on party organisation from outside the executive with powers above it. This set in motion a conscious process to break free of the sect. The Commission's report, delivered at the Fifth Party Congress in July 1922, recommended a complete overhaul of the party's structures and press. Crucial among its proposals were the requirement that all members, without exception, engage in both party and movement work. The formation of organisational cells of CPGB members in workplaces, and the transformation of the party newspaper from a small magazine of miscellaneous articles with a communist bias to a practical publication reporting on and agitating within workers' struggles. Every proposal was accepted. The workers' movement was now the substance of the party. The fruit of this process was not a formula, but real struggle. Following its reorganisation, the CPGB consistently played the role of uniting the disparate economic struggles of the working class into a general political struggle against capitalism. Under the party's leadership, the NUWCM began to function as a real bridge in the workers' movement. Its role in the engineering lockout of March to June 1922 illustrates this clearly, the organisation filling out pickets, sabotaging machinery to prevent scabbing, and forcing relief payments for strikers at the same rate as the unemployed. In the unions, this class solidarity and the RILU's repeated interventions were able to stem a retreat, the Dockers' strike of 1923 continuing against its reformist leaders' wishes, showing the first cracks. Though it was defeated, again by reformist betrayal, the general strike of 1926 was solidified by the CPGB's interventions. The party served as the real political expression of the workers' movement, everywhere focused on uniting the class's real struggles. The factors which led to this transformation, the development of the workers' movement in crisis, the conscious reorganisation of the party, and finally, its role in uniting disparate economic struggles, point to the real core of Marxist organisation, an historically contingent mediation and expression of class struggle.
Что такое советская власть? В чем заключается сущность этой новой власти, которой не хотят или не могут понять еще в большинстве стран? Сущность ее, привлекающая к себе рабочих каждой страны все больше и больше, состоит в том, что прежде государством управляли так или иначе богатые или капиталисты, а теперь первый раз управляют государством, притом в массовом числе как раз те классы, которых капитализм угнетал.
The commonest rebuttal to Marx's analysis of the sect comes in the form of a fetishization of Lenin's theory of the party, the merger thesis. Drawing from Kautsky's view that the socialist movement and the workers' movement originate from different class bases in his commentary on the Erfurt programme, Lenin articulates this in his most famous text on revolutionary strategy, What is to be Done. He argues that intellectuals must bring class political consciousness to the workers from without, as this consciousness cannot arise from trade union action alone, a view of union struggle which Marx did share. This required a disciplined and tightly knit organisation. In the context of Tsarist Russia and the First World War, this framework won out, producing the world's first socialist state. In contrast, Marx never formed a party, and the CPGB dissolved into reformism following the Second World War. After the Bolshevik victory, vast swathes of the Marxist movement have concluded that Lenin's so-called vanguard party is an ideal form of organisation, that a tightly knit group of communist intellectuals organised around a revolutionary programme is the key to revolution, and not a sect at all. This reframing both distorts Lenin's historically concrete intervention and elevates it to a transhistorical principle. The distortion can be illustrated by the different contexts of the Bolshevik Party and the early CPGB. In Tsarist Russia, political organisation was viciously suppressed, the working class was small and fragmented, and illiteracy was rampant. The basis for communist theory was among radical intellectuals not by proclivity, but by necessity. In 1920s Britain, broad but not universal suffrage had been achieved, and literacy amongst the working class had burgeoned through the tradition of letter writing developed in the prior decade's trenches. By 1926, at the height of its activity in the workers' movement, the CPGB's membership was 95% drawn from the working class, with essentially all of its key thinkers from this social force. In treating the class basis of communist theory observed by Lenin as transhistorical, workers' political capacities are reduced to unionism. A counterpoint is given by the CPGB's experience, where literate workers faced with widespread structural unemployment developed revolutionary strategy, as illustrated by the role of the NUWCM in the party's transformation and broader struggle. Equally, what allowed the Bolsheviks to serve as a revolutionary party was not their organisational form, but how this enabled them to relate to the class. Recent scholarship, particularly Lars Ley's Lenin Rediscovered, shows that the Bolsheviks were both broadly embedded in workers' movements and highly adaptive to them. A single case underscores the point. The party did not generate the workers' Soviets of 1905 and 1917. It made them the centre of its strategy, gave them expression, and participated in shaping their politics. Stripped of its transhistoricism, what the merger thesis posits confirms a Marxist view of organisation. The workers are the subject of history. Strategic organisation is a mediation and expression of their motion. The sect is not the only failure state on the Western Marxist left. NGO co-option, spontaneous taylorism of the union or riot, reformism, adventurism, and so on, all pose their own dead ends. However, it is the most dominant and pernicious problem. There is a small but growing acknowledgement of this.
Well, that was Jeremy Corbyn's big set-piece speech. He talked of poverty, of Palestine and the need to take the fight to reform. He did acknowledge the splits in this new party, saying at one point, if we're clear on the principles, everything else will follow.
What this is yesterday afternoon and evening, news started to come out that some people that were signed up supporters of your party that were due to come to Liverpool to attend this inaugural conference some of whom were already here in Liverpool, ready to go in, that they'd been told that they'd been kicked out of the party, that they weren't allowed into the conference, that essentially their membership had been revoked. The reason that was given was officially that they were members of another party.
In Britain, this has emerged in the wake of the failure of your party, which merged a social democratic electoral base temporarily with the activist base of the post-Corbyn Marxist left. With the defeat of this latter section at the parliamentarian wing's hands, a conversation on organisational form and the sect has solidified.
But if those journalists, so-called, spent the same amount of time covering the DSA as they did a pool that nobody swims in, they would find a web of caucuses within the group that explicitly push communism.
In the US, the discussion has evolved through the construction of the Democratic Socialists of America and the complex politics required among its caucuses. This is a welcome development, and the reading list attached includes examples of its literature with limited critical comment. However, in saying this, we would also offer a caution. Marx's comments to Bolt are by no means his only on the sect, but they are his most precise. Despite how crucial it is to his framing, one inflection of his analysis is often overlooked. A sect can be historically justified. Though the tools used to bind together a sect limit political practice, they do provide a degree of institutional continuity. In a context where the workers' movement has been pushed back into disarray, there simply aren't many easy means to achieve this. This is not to fall back, shrug, and suggest forming one. Rather, it is to say that sect formation is fundamentally rooted in the marginalisation of revolutionary politics among the class, and that there aren't any easy answers for the survival of a politics in decline. Its irrationality is rational. Challenging it requires a practical approach, rooted in a flexible organisation. The importance of this part of Marx's understanding can be seen in the example of the CPGB. In an upswell of workers' organisation, a system of sects was able to overcome its own limits. This required the destruction of both the organisational and ideological rigidity of its former politics. In practice, this was an ugly struggle. Those members engaged in the practical work of the working class were forced to depose the elected leadership, to mandate the practice of politics. The bitterness stems from the true problem of the sect. Correct organisation for a Marxist can only be that which allows participation in real class politics. Organisations formed around the perceived correctness of a special set of ideas in isolation from a social base are entrenched against adaptation. In rejecting the sect, we mustn't reject the potential that it may be defeated by revolutionary workers entering into it. What does this leave the anti-sectarian Marxist to do? The first step in recognising the problem and its ubiquity is to face soberly the devastation of the defeat of the contemporary working class movement. We speak here only for Britain. Trade union membership peaked in 1979 at 13.2 million, representing 53% of the workforce. In 2025, it stood at 6.6 million, 22.4% of the workforce. Its composition has also changed, with a largely industrial unionism replaced. 62% of union membership is now in the public sector, with many graduates. This reflects a broader change in employment. Between 1960 and 1979, the workforce was dominated by industrial production, with resource extraction, manufacture and construction alone making up 40% of employees. Today, manufacture has fallen to a third of its size, and services account for roughly 83% of total employment. The fall in union membership represents the erosion of its social base as a political form, a concentrated working class in industrial production now fragmented in low employment, high productivity manufacture, transport, retail or public service. A discussion of what class politics does and can look like on this social terrain is beyond our scope, as it must wrestle with a great many symptoms. We will be returning to these problems on the channel moving forward. There are tools we can begin to use, workers' inquiries, and attitudes that we can take, practical and political agitation, education and internationalism. The object of future analysis can even be specified: the social basis of the contemporary British left, the relations of the class to capital, and these forces to the class. However, here we can offer only a core strategic principle. After all of the words we have spent on it, the core of the organisational outlook we need can be put quite simply. The working classes are not an object to be shaped or entered into. They are a people whose politics are their own art, given space by their own organisation and political participation. A Marxist is a committed partisan of this art and its proliferation. Now, it's over to you.